had no time, and that's the quickest way they could do it. So I thought that was pretty
I didn't notice that, but what I did notice about this movie is that I liked that Nick Cage felt a little too old to be doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
Like a little out of shape. Like it looks like he's been beat to hell and he's bloody, and yet he is still coming for you.
Yeah. And I love that revenge story in him. And I think you do a good job by setting him up as a guy who used to hunt, who was a hunter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I love that scene in the trailer when he explains about the bikers mutilating people, and then the drug guy didn't like them, so he just destroyed their brains, but they love the pain. But I love that. And then he gives them the weapons. And so do you think he was like a former Hellraiser troublemaker? And then he met Mandy and he kind of put his old ways away because they were both damaged. So they met each other and just kind of put their damages, like they tried to sort their lives out, right?
Yeah. So in my head canon, right? What I think about going on in my head is that Nick Cage's character Red was some type of, I guess I'm going to say like special ops person who was probably an alcoholic. And then he met Mandy and they fell in love and he cleaned his act up. And the examples that I can give for that is at the beginning of the movie, someone tries to offer him a beer and he says no. And then when he has that freak out, there is a bottle of liquor hidden in the bathroom, which is something someone who may have been alcohol dependent might do. And so that's just how I pieced it all together in my head.
What her backstory is?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, she comes off very much like a dryad, like a nature goddess type of character.
Yeah. I mean, they build her that way, just the shots. And I mean, Panos makes sure to give us a lot of freeze frames. So when they drive by her in the van, they stop the car right on, they pause right on her face. When she comes out of the water, there's that scene. She just has a certain transfixing, like men are drawn to her. Would you certain kind of men are drawn to her?
Yes.
Broken men are drawn to her?
Maybe, yeah.
But I don't know. When she says that Starling, like, they were so cute. Like, that's the best line reading I've heard in a long time. And can we talk about their planet talk? Is that not one of the best character establishing scenes? They're just laying in bed talking about planets.
Yeah.
And it's legit funny too. Like she's talking about Jupiter.
Saturn?
Yeah,
Saturn.
Wait, which one has all the rings? Jupiter. Jupiter's rings. So she likes Saturn because of the storms. Then Nick Cage says Jupiter, but then he switches over to Galactus. And he's like, well, he eats planets. Like, and then he becomes, I'm not saying that they did this on purpose because he's a big comic nerd, but he kind of becomes a Galactus. He just goes and he destroys these demonic bikers who have been murdering so many people who have some form of weird mythology demons behind them. Then he whites out this brotherhood. He kind of eats, once he wants his revenge mission, he kind of goes and eats worlds.
Yeah. What's so great about that line is that it foreshadows the rest of the film because what I viewed is that the eye of the storm on Jupiter was Nick Cage and Mandy's home life, and that when they left, it was crazy outside. So he went into the insanity of the world.
And then they didn't want to go back into the insanity. That's why they kind of, wow.
Yeah. This movie is extremely layered. And I've watched it more than 3 times, and I'm still getting things every time I watch it or reinterpreting scenes. And that's probably why I like it so much, because it's not straightforward.
And I love, and I also think people should study this as far as cinematography and lighting. They use a lot of dry ice out there just to, once you get smoke out, that can be illuminated. They use a lot of, if you look them up, there's S30C sky panels that you can really set to primary red, which establishes the hue of this film really well. So you could kind of learn how to maybe light your movie like Panos does if you really research this. You could mimic it to the best of your ability. You couldn't achieve it, I would say.
You know what? Why don't we talk about our favorite scenes in this film?
Oh,
because I feel like we've gone through it, and I made a list, and I can go through it if you want.
I have my number one.
Okay, let's. What's your number one?
The Cheddar Goblin.
Oh wow, I'm surprised about that. I'm not surprised it's in your top 5, but number one, really.
So I read this article from Slash Film that sort of connected with me, and when I walked out of this film, I didn't really have the words for it yet. So I think I didn't know how to. I knew that there was comedic elements, and there was comedic elements before the Cheddar Goblin, but after this brutal scene in which the love of his life is burnt, and he is screaming, and they are laughing, and people are smiling, and she will burn bright. and he does this massive freak out, and it's just all gone to hell in a handbasket. He watches on TV this goblin puking macaroni and cheese onto children's heads and their plates, and it's just this moment of absurdity that lets the audience know, okay, it's okay to breathe. It lets go of some of the weight that's on your shoulders, and it just shows how smart the movie is as a whole. And I follow the Cheddar Goblin on Twitter. I think it's just a really neat thing. I think it just, that's a moment I would teach to my students as far as mood setting and levity, and just the creation of something new. Because I think it was such a smart move that people want to promote this movie as a Nick Cage chainsaw fight freakout, but it's very smart, and that's the scene I would point towards.
So I want to tell you my number one scene, and then I also then want to talk about Cheddar Goblin because I did a lot of reading on that, and it's probably my favorite character in the film. So my number one scene, I think, or not I think it is the chainsaw fight.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love the chainsaw fight, but what I love about it is that it's so unexpected. Like, Nick Cage comes in with a chainsaw, and you're like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And the other guy comes out with a giant chainsaw.
That's so
and I
funny.
find it very funny. I was like, whoa. But my number two is the Cheddar Goblin scene. And maybe we read the same article, but this is a quote from an article talking about when Nick Cage comes out and first sees it. And this is from the director. I want it to be a moment where the horror and the absurdity of the universe slap him in the face at exactly the wrong time. Yeah, so I had this realization watching it. I was like, oh, like, this is what it feels like to lose someone. The world keeps going on, and it feels absurd while you're hurting inside. And this is a perfect encapsulation of what that means, or how it feels.
Wow.
Yeah. We could talk about the Cheddar Goblin. Did you research like how that got made?
No, how did that get made?
Oh, this is so good. So that was directed by Casper Kelly. He's of Adult Swim fame, and he did Too Many Cooks. And the director wanted to include a commercial, and they were joking around about a Cheddar Goblin, and it was just a joke. And then all of a sudden they're like, you know what? Let's actually do it. And basically Casper Kelly did it for next to nothing in exchange for Cosmatos agreeing to do a commercial for Kelly in the future.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. They did it for like $1,000 that they gave to the puppeteer who made the puppet, and it was like done over a weekend. And they made 20 gallons of mac and cheese to get this thing going.
Oh, that's so cool. What a neat story. Yeah,
it is. It's really good. I would also highly recommend people go check out Too Many Cooks. I love that thing.
I think my number 2 is The Chemist with Richard Brake.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of, what is it, 31, Rob Zombie's film?
Yeah.
But I like him a lot in it. And I like the look of the guy. And he has a telepathic conversation with Cage. And then he lets his tiger go. I just like the lighting of it. And the way it didn't look like the movie. It was another world. Just the almost all black and no really red. Just a lot of, I don't know, it was a really interesting moment for me. And then I think another neat part about it is that it expanded the world even further. Here's this guy that lives in a shed, and it's bigger on the inside, like a TARDIS. And do you think presumably he's the one that did that to the Black Skulls?
Yes, absolutely. I do. What I love about that scene is a very small character moment is that he is making the acid without gloves on and dipping his hands in the acid. And so it doesn't affect him the way everyone else does. He's so far above us that he can do whatever he wants with the acid. And I thought that was amazing.
That was wild. Just watching him handle that, because if it's as strong as he says, and then did Jeremiah Sand get that gross stuff from him to give to those guys?
I mean, that's what I interpreted. Yeah.
Why didn't they go after the chemist?
I think that if they killed the chemist, they wouldn't get their drugs anymore.
Maybe they were happy about it because they didn't. Man, I gotta tell you, when he goes in their house and there's that couple laying there, and there's just the blood smeared all over the guy's butt, and just she's like they're just naked laying there dead. That image, man, that's like
it's haunting.
That was a next level. It just shows the depravity of what these people are. You got to assume. What's the word? Necrophilia is going on in that home. Just
Yeah.
the weirdest. That's just the. What do you think they did to that big guy that they took that was part of the cult?
They probably ate him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A horrible, horrible death, right?
Yeah. And that's such a good scene of him disappearing, just complete silence, just sucked back into the dark. That's terrifying.
I mean, that is because they hadn't. All right, obviously the strobes were going, and the world was a little weird, but they hadn't been dosed with drugs yet. So when she saw that, that's kind of a literal interpretation of what happened to him. So hands go around his head, and he is dragged away. So there I don't know, that seems like some mystical stuff going on right there.
Yeah. All right. So my number 3 is Red making his axe.
Oh gosh.
It felt like it belonged in a completely different movie, but I was there for it.
Oh, so badass.
Yeah. Because it implies so many things. It's like
He knows how to make an axe.
He knows how to make an axe. He knows how to make an axe that looks crazy. And the axe is like mystical looking. So like, what is his past?
Yeah, how does this dude just know how to make this?
And I love the aviators.
Oh, dude, he just drives around. Oh, man. You know what I think is interesting about Panos? He said that story isn't really important for him. His story is a catalyst for things to be explored. So he has a very loose story, and then he's more in the mood. He's more into, he wanted to make this about Fangoria heavy metal and the cover art from horror films. That's what built him in this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the story, there's still a good story. I think that's a really interesting way to tell stories, though, where you establish the mood and the actions, and that creates the world.
Yeah.
This is a lived-in, man. I'm glad that there's so much behind-the-scenes stuff on this film that we could talk about, because I'd just be fanboying all over this film if there wasn't about it. All right, so I got to come up with my next one.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. I have we already. So I would say the Jupiter bit is amazing, but we've already covered that.
It's very good.
I've already talked about the window. I do love that they live. All right, so how about this? She's working in the store, and Mother Marlene comes up to her, and she senses right away that something is weird about her. Mandy knows that this lady is odd.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, what are you reading, a novel? She's very cagey with this woman. But then she says, we live over by Crystal Lake.
Crystal Lake, yeah.
I mean, that has to be an homage to Camp Crystal Lake, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Right? Camp Blood.
And I just love that they brought that up. It just put a smile on my face when they did. Actually, any scene with Riseborough, I loved her in this movie. But yeah, I like that they said that they live near Crystal Lake. That was just a neat little touch.
So we've talked about my number 4 a little bit. So I love when Red turns and smiles to the camera and the audience is a stand-in for Mandy. It just shows how just out of his mind he actually is.
Gone. Because he dipped his fingers in that mind-melting.
He did, yeah.
Acid goop.
Yeah. And also it's a great Nick Cage moment. Just in his career, like, it encapsulates Nick Cage. Like, the crazy eyes, the big smile, covered in blood, just going 100%. And I love that just quick scene.
And then I think I sent you just a brief message on this. And I like the scene where Mandy finds the dead baby deer, I suppose, in the woods. Yeah. And that's a moment where you can tell where she just feels. Her character just feels things. She sensed it. And she went out there and saw it and she cried. So I think there's this very interesting... That's character building, not saying a word. Just that tear that drops down. You can sense that she feels everything very deeply, if that makes sense. And I thought that was a really strong moment.
Yeah, it's an excellent moment. It reestablishes or continues to establish sort of the empathetic Earth Mother vibe from her. My number 5 is when Mandy laughs at Jeremiah. Yes. I think it's such an unexpected and powerful scene, and it feels cathartic in a way.
It does.
Yeah, because you're like the audience is just so absurd. And if you look at the state of our world today, it's absurd. And sometimes you have to laugh at absurdity.
I love this movie. All right, so I got to do one more.
One more.
Oh goodness. There's so many good parts. I like the part where he goes and visits Bill Duke. It just shows that there's a world outside of him, and he knows this guy. And there's just a world outside of their little area. But I like when he gives him the crossbow and he gives them the arrows. And he says, I'll give them to you on one condition. It's that you put them to good use. And I love that line. And I also like that when he's talking